Hello Natroners, and welcome back to VFX with Natron Shadertoy Take 2. Unfortunately, this version we won't have Tom Morley with me, which he was in my last one, but unfortunately, apparently we think that might have been causing an undue amount of lag and drops of the thing, and I want to give you guys as best a presentation as possible, so we've switched back to my old software, which wasn't working as well for doing dual capture, but we shall see. If it works well for this, then we knew that's a problem. Can't use the other software, or I might have to experiment. It could have been something else. Anyway, today we're going to be working on trying to do Oh yes, and I'm gonna also have to do a lot of stuff manually because I got rid of my controller before, so I've got to do. Today's goal is gonna be to make this. So as you can see, what we did there at the very first video was the original source video that we're going to be overlaying on, and I know in the last video I actually didn't incorporate that, and if you want to learn how to make that bit, that's going to be coming on next Saturday. And hopefully we'll have the problems with Tom figured out by then. We're going to be focusing on today is actually adding those little extra bits inside of Natron using Shadertoy nodes and so forth. And we're actually going to do a little more on this version of the video than we did on the last version of the video. Hopefully everything works well this time and we don't have dropouts and whatnot. Anyhow, with nothing more to say, I say we switch over to Natron, or actually it's not. I seem to have I had the leftovers from an earlier test, so I didn't realize. Alright, so we're going to be creating this little lovely bit. What we're going to be doing is taking the code from here, this is a Shadertoy, a non-native Shadertoy thing, and we're going to put it into Natron. And one of the problems that you might run into is the fact that this contains two bits of code. We have this thing called common, and what common is it's shared. There's a thing in Natron called I think it's called a multi-layer shader or something along those lines. It's a combination of shaders, and they can share common code. And when you have this, there's this tab called common. It's global variables that are accessible by any sub section or sub input of Shadertoy. And so then you have your primary code, which is going to be in is this image. That's our normal Shadertoy. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to take this common and we're going to go in Control, select it all, hit copy. We're going to hop over into Natron right here. And instead of creating a Shadertoy node, what we're going to do is first we're going to hit tab and type in text. And we're going to create a text node. And you're saying to yourself, text node? Why are we creating a text node? Because we're not going to use text node as a text node. We're actually going to relabel this to match what it says inside of Shadertoy. And this is a trick that very few people might know about unless they watched my last video that was breaking up. So the trick is if you relabel this, and we call this common, okay, so that it matches what it says in Shadertoy, we can rebuild the physical structure of Shadertoy inside of Natron, so it works in the almost exact same way. And this saves you a lot of hassle of re-putting these bits together inside of individual Shadertoy nodes, or if stuff has to be shared between or worked between, you can actually make it work between with this technique as well. Let's get into it. All right, so the first thing, whoops, I closed that too quickly. So we've renamed it common. The reason is I don't want this to be confused with the text node. So I'm actually making this a unique node. This is going to be a code node. and we're going to paste our code in here. And the biggest problem that we face with the code is, and the biggest common problem most people run into is the fact that Shadertoy code oftentimes, and we're going to just shrink this down to the text window itself, Shadertoy code often just ends in a bracket, and you sometimes it might not end with a return at the end. So we need to give that return because our next bit of code has to start a few lines down. So in order for it to work, otherwise the code will break. So we hit return twice here. I'm just going to do that for extra precaution. And I'm going to push this off to the side. In fact, I can actually duplicate this. This doesn't, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just hit tab, type in text, let it pull up a new text node. We're going to eliminate the text here in that field, and then we're going to minimize it so only the text view is available. And this, if we looked back at our Shadertoy information, we can see that the second section is called image. So we're going to select all of this by hitting Control A, then we're going to hit Control C to copy it, and then we're going to go back into Natron. We're going to go and we're going to change our text node so that it's image 1 instead of text 1. And then we're going to paste our image 1 code here, and we're going to see we all face the same problem. We want to make sure that we hit return twice at the end, just to give ourselves a wee bit of space before it might continue something that might follow it if we want to put in our own custom code. All right, which is something, this is a whole advantage of working this way, is we can create our own custom code. All right, so now we want to create a Shadertoy node. So I'm going to hit tab, type in Shadertoy, and there we go. We got a Shadertoy node. It should auto link to our viewer node, and what we see is that the Shadertoy node by default has its default texture, which we can see the default shader for the Shadertoy node. We can get to if we twirl down the image shader up here on the right hand side, and we select all this code, we hit delete, and instead of entering code here, what we're going to do is we're going to be getting that code from these text nodes by right clicking and setting an expression. We set the expression, we go over here, I double click on my common. That's because that's the first thing. The common was referred to ahead of time. That's the globals, so to speak, the first code. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to hold down the control key, I'm going to drag with the control key from the common text or the common text area field over into my expression for the Shadertoy node, and that drops it in and it puts it here. It puts a soft link of it, and I'm going to put in, because this is common, I'm going to assign this to a variable. I'm going to call it com equals, and that's what it's going to be. It's going to be the first thing. So then what we want to do is double click on the image. We're going to right click, or we're not going to right click, we're going to just control drag, excuse me, this into our Shadertoy node, and it's going to put it on a new line. We're going to get here, it says unexpected new line character, because we have to make it a multi-line expression. We click on multi-line and that fixes that. Then before this, where it says image 1, we're going to put in img for a variable to hold that code, and we're going to hit space equals so that it assigns it. So now we have those two are assigned to two variables, and all we have to do is return that to our Shadertoy node, and our Shadertoy can compile it all together as one large bit of code. All right, so this allows us to construct this in a visual way inside of Natron, that we can actually see the elements and access them as like little individual libraries of code that can be used and reused in Natron visually, as opposed to inside of a shader node or off on a file somewhere. We're seeing it inside of Natron, and that's very useful from understanding the flow of your graph. So we're going to do return equals, we're going to do com is the first one, plus space img. Those are our two variables. All right, and so we hit OK, and you can see it's created our soft links, green soft links, or our links, expression links to our Shadertoy node, and we can see that our Shadertoy text field for the source has become green because it's fed from these other nodes. Now, that means we can't actually edit the code anymore. So if we want to actually change things, we either have to change it in each one of these individual text fields, or we have to add our own. We can add to it in our own, and it's as easy as creating a new text node. If we want to add to it, we just simply type in a text node. I want a text node. I'm going to rename this text node from text1 to my code, and that creates creates an area. I'll just eliminate the text field, the text from it. By just changing that, it makes it so I can minimize this so that only the text is in here, and I could put in a whatever type of code I wanted to put in here. I believe this is shader code, which is I believe is a C++ variant, or something along those lines. Anyway, the GLSL code. Anyhow, you could enter it here, and then you could link that in by just simply going back to our Shadertoy node, right-clicking, edit our expression, and then here instead, what we can do is I'm going to I need to pull up my code area, put it here. I'll just control drag that in here, and you can see it put it at the bottom. That's because whenever you drag an area in to create a link to it, it puts it at the bottom of the expression. So we're going to just select that, and I'm going to cut it and then I'm going to hit return, and I'm going to put in my code as my variable equals, and then I'm going to link to my code, and then for the return variable, what I'm going to do is put in plus my code. All right, and that would return it, and that will link it in, and now my code is officially linked in. So I can do that, and that way, if I duplicate this Shadertoy node, because I have these common things that I want actually referenced into it, all I have to do is clone it. And if I don't want these others from it in the clone, or not the clone, excuse me, I could clone it. There's nothing preventing me from cloning this, but I want to actually copy it. So I'm going to hit Alt-C and create a copy that's linked with all the links to the existing stuff, and then I can go into this particular Shadertoy node and access its expression, and I can edit the expression. And if I just wanted, for example, only the comment to be linked to it, and maybe my code, I can, one need to make sure that my code is my variable set correctly, and there we go. And now we can see, on this one, it's still referencing it. Right, I didn't actually remove the link. Let's get rid of that link as well, so that it only is linked to those two. And so now we can see that the image shader information is only linking to this Shadertoy node, and these two other ones are linked to this other ones. So I can share it onto that other one, which, by the way, this will now do nothing over here. It's going to break because it's an incomplete code. I don't actually have image information for it, but which is something I didn't do in the last version. So I'm going to just delete that just to show you that it can work. All right, so we have it. We see it here. Here's our code. It looks very similar to what we had in Shadertoy, except for there's a problem here. The problem is that Shadertoy code on the web, Shadertoy is designed to work in RGB color space, sRGB to be accurate. And Natron, by default, as we know, works in linear color space. So what's happening is because Natron expects the code coming out of Shadertoy to be in linear color space, but this code was not written in linear color space, it's looking incorrect. And there is code you can get, and you could actually create a section in here. You could create a color space code transform and add it into this at the end. That would be something you could put into that my code area. But an easier way, if you're just getting it off the web, and you want to do it on your own, and by the way, don't copy code that wasn't created to be shared, or somebody didn't do to you know, in a way to share it. Don't use copyrighted Shadertoy node. Double check your stuff. Okay, back to this. So how do we do this? We put in this thing called an OCIO node, which is the Open Color. It's the Open Color Information Committee, I believe it stands for, or something along that. But we want to use the OCIO color space node, which we talked about when we were talking about color spaces. And here we have an input color space and an output color space. And this is just like this is the exact same thing that happens on our file nodes. Our file nodes have this section of code integrated into them, so you can do this natively. But because Shadertoy does not have this natively integrated, all we have to do here is tell it that we want our input to be, instead of linear, we want it to be sRGB, and lo and behold, that fixes our Shadertoy node. And now we could put this over something, and I didn't. This is where we're picking up where the other version of this did not finish. This version's going to finish correctly, because we're going to actually integrate it with what we had, which is, I'm going to put that other node in here, which, all right, so here's this thing. We're not going to create this here, but we want to put it over it. So how do we actually get it so that these two combine together? Well, one of the things I did ahead of time is I made sure that this looked good, or looked the way I wanted it to ahead of time. I wanted it to look proper inside, along with Shadertoy. So you can see this was actually created completely in Natron, everything including the little sparkies coming off. I know a lot of you are going, he's got sparks coming off of that little Natron, and he's got flames coming off of it. Yes, that's a reason to stick around next week and tune in on next Saturday. We may do some extra node things between now and then, or to test out dual streams. Anyway, how are we going to do this? We're going to sit here, and I'm going to add a merge node after this. I'm going to, for this thing, because this was created with the intention of working with this OCIO node at the end, I'm going to just pipe the Shadertoy node into it. And we can see that the Shadertoy node, as soon as I put it onto it, it looks wrong. It doesn't look correct. And so how do I get to use this Shadertoy node with my underlying footage? Well, it's actually easy, because this happens to be flames. What I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to change the merge style from over to screen. And by doing that, that's integrated these two merge nodes, and now they work. Now the fire node, or the sparky node, is overlaying properly inside of this merge. We've merged it with our background. I can just simply pipe our OCIO into there, connect it to our output, and then it corrects everything so that it looks correct, and then we can rewind it and we can hit play. All right, and there we go. We have a fully functioning node, and I don't know exactly how long we've been streaming. I need to just check this, see how long we've been at this for 19 minutes. Good. We have a little bit of extra time. What we're going to do, I wanted to get into a second thing, which is called, there's this type of Shadertoy. We're going to create a new project. There's another type of Shadertoy node we're going to talk about now, quickly. That creates more chaos than this, and that is this type of node. This is, I think it's called a multi. It's basically a multi-buffered image. There's multiple Shadertoy nodes here, and they're all linked together in some random, funky ways. All right. So what we need to do is reconstruct this. This is a technical one, and if you just tried to get any of these into Shadertoy or into Natron, it wouldn't work. So we're going to, back in Natron, we're going to first create a Shadertoy node. This time we're going to just copy the stuff into a Shadertoy node. So we're going to do a Shadertoy. All right. and I'm going to clone this 4 times, to 1 for each of those channels. I'm going to copy it once for each channel. So I'm going to go copy. Whoops, why didn't that work? Copy. There we go. Alt copy, alt copy, alt copy, and alt copy. There we go. That's good enough. So here we go. We have. Whoops, I didn't need 4. I take it back. We'll get rid of the last one. We just needed 3 of these. All right. So we need 4 total copies. All right. So this first Shadertoy node is going to be our first Shadertoy. And so what I recommend on this in this situation is if you're going to copy in this, we need to mimic it. So we go back to our shader, and it's called buffer A. So what I'm going to do is go back to Natron, and here, whoops, wrong one. I'm going to close this one out so that one doesn't accidentally wind up and confuse me. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to change our Shadertoy node, and I'm going to go over to its node info, and I'm going to put buffer 1. All right, that way I know what that buffer is. All right, I'm not changing it from a Shadertoy node because this is a Shadertoy node. This is a true Shadertoy node. We're going to use it as a Shadertoy node, and it's just going to be buffer 1. All right, so what we need to do is copy our info from buffer 1 into this, and so we're going to go back over here, go back to this, select excuse me, this is buffer A. It doesn't matter. It's buffer A, buffer 1. If we select it all, we know what it is. We're going to select it all. We're going to copy this. We're going to go back into Natron. We're going to go into its code window, select it all, delete what's there. We're going to paste in the buffer code, and we're going to hit compile, and it produces this, and it doesn't look at all like what we saw over on the web. Now, I know you can get the sources elsewhere, and I'm sure that when yes, this is called. Oh, we have somebody who's commented. Tom commented it's called multipassing. All right, this is a multipass Shadertoy node. All right, so we're making a multipass. So Tom is going to link into some of where you can get the actual resources. I haven't tested the real resources. I created some fake ones that I happen to know work well enough for our purpose. So I'm going to bring those in. These, if we look back at this Shadertoy node, we can see down here it has the 4 I channels. Every Shadertoy node has 4 inputs, okay? And that's because the real Shadertoy website also has 4 inputs. But on Shadertoy, the website, you can only use predefined things that are inside of it, as far as I know. There might be a way you can link elsewhere. I think people have done it, but anyway, these happen to be built into the Shadertoy website. Tom will link to where you can get the actual images. I happen to make scaled up versions of these because I know they worked when I did my test, and we want to wind up with something that looks correct. So anyway, this is image 1, image 2, image 3. All right. So we're going to go back to Natron, and you can see here's image 1, here's image 2, and here's image 3. So what we're going to do is on our first buffer channel, we're going to take, you can see these, it has all these things. This is channel I0. I connect that up here, and you can see it looks a little wonky, and I will go into how we fix that in a bit. Then I take channel 1, and I go to this one. And I take channel 2, which is this one, and connect it up to that. And we're going to leave 3 empty. All right. So the first, we're not going to actually correct these until the end. These are not looking correct. We're going to take and go to the next step. We're going to look at the actual page, go back to our thing. We're going to go to buffer B. Buffer B, we're going to select all the code from here. We're going to hit copy. All right, and you can see that I channel 0 for buffer B is connected to buffer A. This A here represents this buffer. So what we need to do, that means that input 0 on our B Shadertoy node has to go to buffer A. So we're going to go back to Natron. This is going to be our second one, or actually, no, that's not. We're going to pull, this is going to be our second one. We're going to open this up. We're going to make it, we're going to change its label. We're going to call it BU buffer B or buffer 2. Doesn't matter. We'll make it B just so it complies. All right, we click off of it and we go back here and we can see it says buffer B. We're not going to worry about the buffer 1. So we're going to take that channel 0, connect it to buffer 1, okay? And then for this one, we're going to open it up and we're going to select all its code. We're going to delete it. We're going to paste in the code we got from Shadertoy. We're going to hit, we're going to click out of it. We're going to hit compile. And then we're going to go take our viewer node and link it to that and view it. And all that's done is it's blurred it a bit more. Okay? All right. That's all this one happens to have going to it. So then this third one is obviously, we'll just double click on this one right now. And we'll open up that shader. Whoops. Open up that shader and we'll go to the node. And we're going to call this BU buffer C. All right. And that's going to be where the buffer C information is going to come from. All right. And we're going to go back to our Shadertoy over here. We're going to go to buffer C. Select all this code. Copy it. And it says that shader C is taking the information, its I channel 0 is buffer B. So I say, okay, well, that's easy enough. We go back to Natron and I take my I channel 0 for buffer C, connect it to buffer B. Then I take and select the code in that node. I delete it. I replace it with the correct node from Shadertoy. I hit compile. It's compiled it. Now I take my channel, I take my viewer node, I connect it up to that, and we can see now it's blurred it. Now this looks a lot like what the final output of this looks. Very, very similar. We're still off a bit, but we still have the final thing, which is the image node. All right, and here's our image node. All right, and by the way, this can actually have, Shadertoy, as you can see, can have up to 4 buffers coming into it. So we can see that the image node has channel I coming into it to channel 0. Channel B is coming into channel 1, and C is coming into channel 2. Okay, that's pretty easy. All we have to do is go back to Natron. We take our last one. We're going to label this one. We're going to want to go over there. We want to make sure we're keeping things correct and identifiable in our graph. So we're going to call this one image. All right. And we're going to just clear out. We're going to go back here. That way it's labeled properly. We can see all our buffers. And we're going to say channel 0 went to buffer 1 or buffer A. Channel 2 went to buffer 2B. Channel 3 or channel 2, I should say. It's actually channel 0, channel 1, and channel 2 went to buffer C. Now we connect up to that, and it looks weird in here because we haven't changed our code for that one. We'll go over here, select it all. I do believe I copied it. I want to make sure I did copy it. I want to go back here, select all of the image code, which is not very much actually. Just take copy that, go back into Natron, and paste that in here, and then we hit compile. And there we go. We have what in theory should be. And you were looking at this and you say to yourself, aha, we already know what the problem with this is. The reason it doesn't look right, we think, is because we don't have an OCIO node to convert it from a sRGB color space. So we'll put that in. We'll put in our OCIO color space right here. And we tell it that the input is going to be sRGB, which fixes half of the problem. Now we look at that and we say, does that look correct? I don't know. Let's go back here. We're going to rewind this, pause this. Does that look the same? Honestly, it looks pretty good. That actually looks better than when I did it. You know what it may be? Maybe because I saved these as PNGs. It's possible, you know, when I pulled these in, I'm just going to let you guys know in on a little secret. When I pulled these in originally, I had an issue with these. They were not being dealt with correctly on inside of Natron. If that happens, if you happen to pull it in and it looks way off, what it probably means is that the inputs that you're pulling in from Shadertoy, whatever they are, may not be, may need to be output in sRGB. So what you would want to do in that case is you would want to, let's close this. I want to make sure I'm clicking on the correct thing. All right. So here's our file 1. We're going to just play with this. All right. This happens to be, I do believe, the first input. What we're going to do here is for the output color space, let's just try putting this to sRGB. And that changes it. All right. That looks a little weird. I'm thinking that this is not what it's supposed to be. Yeah, this looks definitely different than what I had before. So I just want to just go in here and... Oh! I know why it is. When I scaled these up and I had them pre-saved. So yes, all right. My versions of these images are going to already be converted into the proper color space. That's why. All right. Let me just to show you that you will have to do this correctly. Mine were pre-saved as linear in linear color space, which is why they're looking correct here. I'm going to go in here. I downloaded the real ones, or I think I did. I want to make sure I've got the right ones. I think this is the real McCoy from the Shadertoy thing. I think this is the real B. And they're at a different aspect ratio, which is why I don't think they actually work correctly. And this should be C. Now, you might notice that these, if we look at this, just look at this, all right? So this is A, all right? And this is what my A is. As you can see, the colors don't match. That's because mine is already transformed into linear color space. I forgot I did that as part of my thing. So let's put these in here, just so that if you did your own thing, it would work hopefully correctly. So we're going to put those all in, and let's go back, and now let's look at them at the end, and everything is probably going to look really, really wonky. Not positive. All right. As you can see, we have several problems here. One of the problems is that obviously these have come in at the wrong format for what we're outputting. So what I'm going to just do for one of these, just to show that this is exactly what the problem is, and how to overcome this problem, we're going to put in a reformat node. So here we're going to put in a reformat, so that this is how you would have to do it. We want to change our reformat so that it matches our output format, which is going to be 1920 by 1080. And there we go. And that's what it looks like when it comes in, which looks nothing like, if we look at that and then we compare it to what I had, this is what I had, and this is what, if you pulled it in from the web, this is what it would come in as, okay? We've reformatted it so it matches up, and if we go back over to our Shadertoy, it doesn't look anything like it. You can see these have these nice glows here, whereas on ours, it looks like these dark things. What that is from, that is because the color space on here is set so that it's coming in as sRGB, but it's also going out as linear, and we don't want it to. Remember, this Shadertoy expects to work with sRGB, so it comes in as sRGB, so we have to tell it to output, because this shader was designed to work with sRGB as sRGB, and as soon as I do that, ta-da, this particular node has now been transformed so it will work properly with this. And I would have to do the same thing with these other ones, all right? But I'm not gonna, and that should make it match. I'm just double checking. It doesn't match exactly, but you know, it's close enough. Well, so I'm just to save time here. I don't want to make this last any longer than it has to. I'm gonna take these ones that I converted myself, and I'm going to feed them. Obviously, the point of bringing these into from the internet, these images in from the internet, is to feed them in. I can't tell you how to fix them properly so they'll work and give you exactly the right thing. You're going to have to play with changing the aspect ratios and reformatting it till it works for inputs. That's going to be a totally different thing, and it's a user definable parameter. But you need to know that you need to transform whatever is going into an input for these on the internet, even your internal code. That means your internal code's coming from Natron. Your colors inside of Natron are manipulated in linear color space. So you have to, if you're going to feed it into this as a source, it means you have to actually transform it into sRGB color space using this node, this type of OCIO node, but you would take linear as the input color space and then output it as sRGB to go into, and in fact, let me just do that with one of mine. This is, well, you know what? I'm not gonna do that. Just because it means I'd have to double transform. It would be weird. You just know that you need to do that. All right. It's just, we're gonna save the time. All right. Let's just make sure this actually physically functions. So we hit play. Let's watch it. Does this actually move across the screen? It's taking a little while. But we should wind up with a result that looks almost identical to what the Shadertoy result looks like on the web. And I wanted to just double check my time. How long have we been going? We've been going 36 minutes. We have a few minutes more that we can go with here before I want this to actually do the whole thing to show you that this actually works. So this is called the multi-pass Shadertoy node. Set up, and this is how you would build it with multiple buffer inputs. And knowing these two techniques, you should be able to take any Shadertoy code that you find on the internet and you can make it work inside of Natron. Just remember that just because you can do that doesn't mean you should. You need to double check your code. And I'm going to point out something about that original code that we used. And you can see it just switched to the second image just like it does in the other one. And we're going to do that. We're going to have it, I want to let it switch to the third one before I rewind it and actually start playing. Now remember also, Natron, part of the reason this is going much slower than it does on the web version is that the web version's rendering out at a much lower resolution. We're actually rendering this out at HD resolution. I've scaled the images up. I did a whole lot of post-processing to get them to look kind of sort of like what I thought they would look like if they had been properly scaled up to this resolution, so that the output from Natron would sort of match what we would get. That was my prep work. Again, this is going to be something you guys are going to do on your own. And there we go. It's switched over to the last one. And so now I'm going to rewind it and just let it play. And here we can see it's playing around. It's bipping. It switches and then it plays and then it switches again. And now we're going to let it pause there. All right. And if we go back to our actual Shadertoy and play the Shadertoy and watch it, lo and behold, we get the almost identical animation. We have it changes just like we had, and this just keeps cycling and looping because that's the way this particular Shadertoy gizmo was set up, and it looks very similar. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close. And that the only variances here are really the fact that my input sources don't match 100%, and I didn't make them match 100%. It's again user choice, user thing. So with that, I'm going to call that, so we close down the other one. I'm going to say, so today we learned about making multi-pass Shadertoy nodes, and also how to take nodes that are made in multiple construction areas and convert them to work inside of Natron so that you can use them inside of Natron. We also learned how to address color space issues using color space transformations, and the fact that the web's anything you find off the web 90 is almost guaranteed going to be working in RGB color space, and so we have to switch anything that feeds into them from linear color space in Natron to our sRGB color space, and then we have to convert it back once it gets outside of Natron or outside of the Shadertoy setup, so that it can go back into our composite. Or you have to work with your composite and make your composite. You have to make your composite work with those parameters, and the ultimate goal of that, of course, is going to be making something like this. Again, this is before. And this is after. All right, everybody. Keep on nitroning.